Hey guys, welcome to the notes for converting to standard form. We are in Unit 3B. Our essential question is, what is the process for converting linear equations into standard form? So we have spent this unit in 3B talking about point-slope form and slope-intercept form, and then now we're going to talk about it in standard form. We hit on it a little bit already, but we're going to go ahead and review. Standard form is ax plus by equals c. Okay, so standard form is called standard form just because it's the standard, right? When we get to quadratics, you'll also notice that standard form for that also has a, b, and c. But remember that there's nothing really special about this form, but a, b, and c represent numbers. So it's nothing to be scared of. And I am going to preface this with, this is one of those things that we do struggle with a bit, so it is important that you are paying attention to each step and what the goal is at the very end. I'm going to try to keep steps and such to a minimum, just because remembering a lot of steps can be a little confusing, but I do want you to know this next part. There's a star next to this because it is super important. Standard form has 3 requirements. There are 3 requirements, and they're very important. That's why I have a special little box for them. Okay, so the 3 requirements are that x and y are on the same side. And that's pretty, you can see that, right? X and y are on the same side here. We want x and y on that left side. And then we want the c on the other side. So for example, you want ax plus by on the left, and then c on the right. So you want anything with just a number on the left, on the right side. The second thing is that you may not have any fractions. That doesn't mean we're not going to be dealing with fractions. It means we don't want fractions in our final answer. So if there are fractions, we're going to have to get rid of them. The last requirement is that a must be positive. Whatever your a value is, it needs to be a positive number, okay? Now, I want to make sure that you note that a is always attached to x, and b is attached to y. So ax plus by equals c. The a has to be positive. B and c can be negative. Doesn't matter. A needs to be positive. So before we get started, I want us to just look at some equations to see if we can tell if they're in standard form or not. So number 1, 4x plus 3y equals 10. The first requirement is that x and y need to be on the same side. Check, they're on the same side. The second requirement is that we don't want any fractions. That also includes decimals, so no decimals and no fractions. The reason why I don't put fractions up here is because they're kind of the same thing, right? Like 0.5 and 1/2 are still parts of a number. We don't want fractions, we don't want decimals. So there's no fractions or decimals in number 1. And then what is our a value? Positive 4. A is positive 4 here, so all 3 requirements check out, so that means yes, this is in standard form. Number 2, is this in standard form? 3x minus 2y equals 5. X and y are on the same side. A is positive, it's positive 3, and there's no fraction, so this is also yes. Negative 4x plus 3y equals 7. Is this in standard? X and y are on the same side. There are no fractions. However, your a is negative 4. So this is going to be no, because a is negative. Now, this isn't something I'm going to require you to do. Like, this isn't the homework assignment, is determining if it's in standard form. It's more of just, can you figure it out? Because you're going to have to be able to do this on your own, too. Number 4, negative 2y plus 4x equals 5. The first step is, are x and y on the same side? Yes. Are there any fractions? No, so that's good. The last requirement is that a needs to be positive. Well, what's your a here? Your a is 4. Remember, a is attached to x. It's ax plus by equals c. Your a here is 4. Your b here is negative 2, and your c is 5. So it's out of order. But is it standard? Yes, it is in standard. It's just flipped around, so it tricked you. Number 5, 5x minus 1/2 y equals 3. X and y are on the same side. However, we have a fraction present, so this is no. There's a fraction. Okay, so again, just being able to recognize that because it's going to be really important. There are 8 problems that we're going to go through in these notes. The more into the notes we get, the more challenging it will be. So we are going to start off pretty simple, and then we're going to get into some more tougher things. So you want to convert each equation into standard form, all 8 problems that we're going to do. Starting with number 1, we want to go to standard form. The first requirement is that we want x and y on the same side. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 3x on both sides. Now, when I subtract 3x, I know you want to do y minus 3x. I know you want to do that. However, in standard form, what comes first? The x comes first, right? And then the y. So you want to write the x first. So it's going to be negative 3x. And then this y here, because it doesn't say that it's negative, we're assuming that it's positive, right? So if there was like a negative here, then we would put a negative here. But we know that it's positive. And we're going to be doing that in a lot of the problems. And this is equals 7. So all I've done right now is I subtracted 3x on both sides to get x and y together. And then I make sure that I put the x first. Now the next step here is to make sure, is this in standard? Well, x and y are on the same side. There's no fractions, but our a is negative. It's negative 3. Well, what can I multiply to a negative number and make it positive? I can multiply by negative 1. But when you multiply one side to negative 1, you have to multiply the other side to negative 1. So let's go ahead and put parentheses around the entire thing and multiply everything by negative 1. Because anything you do to one side, you have to do to the other. So we're just taking care of both things at once. So we have negative 1 times negative 3x, which is going to give us positive 3x. Negative 1 times positive y is negative 1y, or just negative y. You can write a 1, but I'm not going to. Negative 1 times 7 is negative 7. Is this in standard form? X and y are on the same side. There are no fractions, and a is positive, positive 3. So what did we have to do? Well, we did have to subtract the x because we needed them on the same side. But just because you have x and y on the same side does not mean it's in standard. You want to make sure that it meets all three requirements. And because a was negative, we multiplied everything by negative 1. Moving on to number 2. We want x and y on the same side here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 5x on both sides. Okay? Remember, we want to write our x first. So this is going to be negative 5x. And then plus y, because it's positive y, equals negative 12. Is this in standard? No. Your a value is negative 5. We want it to be positive, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to manipulate it by multiplying everything by negative 1. Make sure you divide everything by negative 1. Everything. Anytime you multiply by a number, you multiply everything by it. Negative 1 times negative 5 is positive 5x. Negative 1 times y is going to be negative 1y, or just negative y. Negative 1 times negative 12 is going to be positive 12. And then now we have standard form. Okay? Now, if you didn't already know, we actually started in slope-intercept form, y equals mx plus b, and converted to standard, right? Y equals mx plus b, and then we went to ax plus by equals c. Same thing in this one. Slope-intercept to standard form. Well, in these are both in point-slope form. Okay, so I just want you to kind of be aware of that. It's in point-slope form now. Now, standard form doesn't have any parentheses, right? ax plus by equals c has no parentheses, so we want to get rid of that. We will have to be dealing with fractions today, so it'll be okay. So let's go ahead and distribute the fraction so that we can, or distribute the slope so that we can get rid of those parentheses. Negative 1/3 times x is going to be negative 1/3 x. Negative 1/3 times negative 6 is positive 2. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 1 on both sides to get the y by itself. Y equals negative 1/3 x plus 1. Now what form is this in? Y equals mx plus b, just like the previous two problems. So now I can go ahead and just do what I've been doing. Our goal again is still to get x and y on the same side. So let's go ahead and get them on the same side. We're going to add 1/3 x on both sides to get rid of the x on the right. We want them on the same side. So then I have positive 1/3 x plus y equals positive 1. Is this in standard form? Not quite, but close, right? So x and y are on the same side. A is positive because it's positive 1/3, but there's a fraction present. We need to get rid of that fraction. Well, we're going to multiply everything by a certain number. Now here's the thing to get rid of fractions, right? We hate fractions. We want to get rid of them. So to get rid of fractions, I'm going to make sure that you make a note of this to yourself. To get rid of fractions, multiply by the largest denominator. Okay, so to get rid of fractions, multiply by the largest denominator. So for example, this is a fraction. The top part is called the numerator. The bottom part is called the denominator. So it doesn't even matter what the numbers are. I only care about the denominator. So if this was like 3 over 9, or maybe 5 over 2, the denominator is still whatever's in the bottom. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. Okay, so looking at this problem, you want to multiply by the largest denominator. We want to get rid of that fraction. Okay, well, the biggest denominator here and the only denominator we have is 3. So we're going to multiply everything by a positive 3. Everything. 3 times 1/3 is 1. So this is going to be just 1x, or just x. 3 times y is going to be plus 3y. And then 3 times positive 1 is 3. And this is in standard. X and y are on the same side, no fractions. A is positive 1. Okay, so this one was a little bit more work than the last problem because we started off in point slope form. But again, we're still doing the same process over and over again. Number 4, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to distribute. I want to get rid of those parentheses. So we're going to distribute 2/5 to both things. So we have y minus 4 equals 2/5 x. 2/5 times 10 is going to be plus 4, I believe. Let me double check. Let me get my calculator. 2/5 times 10. I would hate to do mental math wrong and then the whole thing's wrong. All right, the next step here, we want to go ahead and get y by itself. So let's go ahead and, just like in the last problem, we wanted y by itself. So here we're going to add 4 to both sides. And remember, you want to add to like terms. Y equals 2/5 x plus 8. So we've gone from point slope form to slope intercept form, and now we're going to go to standard form. Okay, well, the next step here is we want to subtract 2/5 x on both sides, because we want to get x and y on the same side. So now I have negative 2/5 x, because it was positive, that's why I subtracted. Then I have plus y equals positive 8. Well, this is definitely not in standard form. There's 2 things wrong with this. The first thing that's wrong is that your a is negative. The second thing is that there's fractions here. So we got to get rid of both of those things. So we're going to multiply everything by something. You know for a fact that your a right now is negative. In order to get rid of a negative, you need to multiply it by another negative to opposite the sign, right? So, for example, in number 1, it was negative 3. To get rid of negative 3, we multiply by a negative number, which would just be 1. Here, we're going to multiply by negative, but we also want to get rid of, let's get rid of 2 things at once, right? Kill 2 birds with 1 stone. First of all, if we multiply by this negative, we get rid of the negative here. But let's go ahead and get rid of the fraction too. Well, what's the biggest denominator here? 5. It's not 8 because 8 is technically over 1, so the denominator over there is 1. So the biggest denominator is 5. So we multiply by negative 5 to get rid of the fraction and the negative number. It is also correct if you want to multiply by negative 1 and then positive 5. It's the same thing. So I'm doing 2 steps in one by just multiplying by negative and the positive, or negative and the denominator at the same time. Negative 5 times negative 2/5 is positive 2, and you have an x. Negative 5 times y is negative 5y. Negative 5 times 8 is going to be negative 40. Okay, so again, this one was a little bit more work because now we had to get rid of 2 things. We had to get rid of the negative in front, which we can't have, and the fraction. So you want to make sure that you're looking out for every single requirement because all of them need to be met, right? We can't just have some work and some not. So just making sure we understand. Okay, moving on. Next page. Now, here, we're just given a point and a slope. And you're like, well, what am I supposed to do with this? That's not even an equation. Well, can I go from point slope form to standard? Yes. If I go from point slope, and then I go to slope intercept, and then I go to standard. So, if they don't give you any information, if they don't give you anything except for some random stuff, you have to start in point slope first. And this will always be the order. So you start in point slope. From point slope, you want to go to slope intercept. After slope intercept, you want to go to standard, which is where you want to be. And I'll go ahead and write each of those forms here so that we know them. So you want to go from point slope to slope intercept to standard. Now, if it's already in slope intercept, then you just go to standard. But if they don't give you anything, then you have to start in point slope form. Get rid of the parentheses, move the x over, and make sure everything's in standard. So, number 5, they give us a point and they give us a slope. Now, the special thing about point slope is when you plug in the point, it's opposite signs. So, if I have y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1, x1, y1, and this is my m, right? Let's go ahead and make this a different color so it's not mixed up with the other stuff up there. Well, then I have, when I plug in y, my y1 is positive 2, but when I plug it in, it's going to be negative 2. My slope is going to be positive 2. And then I have x, plug in my x1. Well, it was negative 3, but now it's going to be positive 3. So now I have point slope form. Now from point slope form, I basically treat it like the other two problems that I just had, right? With point slope form, I have this, and then I just distribute and do like I do the same things, right? The only difference with this one is that we had to put it in ourselves. They didn't give us point slope form, but that's still okay. All right. First step, distribute. Y minus 2 equals 2 times x, which is 2x. 2 times 3 is positive 6. The next step is we want to get the y by itself, so we're going to add 2 to both sides. And we get y equals 2x plus 8. See, we just went from point slope to slope intercept. We went from y minus y1, and we went to y equals mx plus b. From slope intercept, now we're going to go to standard. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract 2x on both sides. So we have negative 2x plus y equals positive 8. Sorry, I'm moving this up because it's just a little too close. But this is still not in standard. Why not? Your a is negative. You have x and y on the same side, no fractions, but your a is negative. So you got to get rid of the negative. And the way to get rid of a negative is to multiply everything by negative 1. Negative 1 times negative 2x is going to be positive 2x. Negative 1 times y is negative 1y, or just negative y. And then negative 1 times 8 is going to be negative 8. And now this is in standard form. So you got to make sure all of those requirements are met, or it's not going to work out. Moving on, we have a point and a slope. Let's go ahead and write our point slope formula down again, formula. So my point is going to be x1, y1, and my slope is negative 1/2. Remember, it's opposite signs for your point. So we're going to have y plus 8 equals negative 1/2, because that's our slope, times x minus 4. From here, you want to get rid of those parentheses, right? We have point slope. Let's go to slope intercept. Let's get rid of the parentheses. So we have y plus 8 equals negative 1/2 x. Negative 1/2 times negative 4 is positive 2. And then we're going to subtract 8 on both sides to get y by itself. So we have y equals negative 1/2 x minus 6. So now we're in mx plus b. We're in slope intercept. Now let's go to standard. We add 1/2 x to both sides. We want x and y on the same side. 1/2 x plus y equals negative 6. Now, is this in standard? No. X and y are on the same side. A is positive, but a is also a fraction. We got to get rid of fractions. Multiply everything by the largest denominator. Well, the largest denominator is 2. 2 times 1/2 is 1, so it's just going to be 1x. 2 times y is going to be positive 2y. 2 times negative 6 is negative 12. You want to make sure you multiply everything by what you're multiplying by, right? So you don't want to just multiply some things. You always multiply everything. Okay, 2 problems left. Now in 7 and 8, they give us 2 points. That's all they gave us. Well, what am I supposed to do with 2 points? Well, if they don't really give you much, you know for a fact that you have to start in point slope form. But in order to do point slope form, I need a point and a slope. Well, I know how to find slope from 2 points, so that's what we're going to have to do. Slope formula is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. So as each problem is going on, we're adding more and more steps to this. Let's go ahead and label our points x1, y1, x2, y2. Okay, so our y2 is negative 1 minus positive 4 x2 is 4 minus negative 8. This equals negative 5 over 12. And I don't think that simplifies any further, so we're going to have to use that as our slope. So that means our slope is negative 5 over 12. Is this my answer? No. But we know that we need to put it in point-slope form, so I have a slope, and I just have to pick a point. It doesn't matter what point you pick. I'm going to pick the second one just because it's smaller numbers. So we want point-slope form. So let's plug in our information. Y plus 1 equals negative 5 over 12, x minus 4. And again, it does not matter what point you pick. Okay, so I just picked the second point, but I just plug in that information. Now that I have point-slope form, I can start converting. First step, distribute. Y plus 1 equals negative 5/12 times x is negative 5/12 x. Negative 5/12 times negative 4 is positive. Let's see what this simplifies to. It's going to be positive 5 over 3. Nope, just kidding. Yeah, I think it is positive 5 over 3. Yep. Positive 5 over 3. The next step here, we want to get y by itself, subtract 1 on both sides. Remember, you can only combine like terms. I know this problem seems a little bit scary because of all the fractions, but again, you know how to mess with numbers in a calculator. You got it. It just looks scary, but you're doing the same exact process as we have been. And I've tried to color code every single step. They're exactly the same. Okay, so this is going to be 5/3 minus 1 is going to be 2/3. It's not the prettiest sight, right? But we still want the same goal, right? Get that in standard form. Right now, it's in y equals mx plus b. So notice, again, just like our steps at the beginning, point, slope, slope-intercept, standard. We want to go from each step. So now we're going to go to standard form. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 5/12 x on both sides because we want x and y on the same side. 5/12 x plus y equals 2/3. Now, I have two fractions here, so I know I don't even want the fractions, so I need to get rid of them somehow. Well, the way to get rid of fractions is to multiply by the largest denominator. So, would you multiply by 12 here or by 3? Hopefully you said 12. You want to multiply by the largest denominator, right? So, it's going to be 12, what we're distributing, and it's a positive 12 because 5/12 is already positive. The only time we multiply by a negative number is if we're trying to change the sign. 12 times 5/12 is 5, so we're going to have 5x. 12 times y is positive 12y. And then 12 times 2/3 is 8. All right, and we're on to our last problem. Okay, we're given 2 points here, so we're going to have to start with our slope. We got to find our slope first. Go ahead and label our points. x1, y1, x2, y2. So we're going to have 0 minus 10, and then we're going to have 9 minus 6. Well, that simplifies to negative 10 over positive 3, and that doesn't simplify either, so our slope is negative 10 over 3. But again, not our answer. We want to put it in point-slope form. If they didn't give us an equation, we got to put it in point-slope. That's the easiest form to put it in. So we're going to have slope, and we pick a point. It doesn't matter what point you pick. I'm going to go ahead and pick the first one for this one, just to be different. Okay, so I have y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. My circle here is a little messy. Okay, so that means we have y minus 10 equals negative 10/3 x minus 6. Move this up a little bit. Okay, first step, distribute. Again, so now we're just doing the same thing we have been. We're going to distribute. Negative 10/3 x. Negative 10/3 times negative 6 is going to give us positive 20. Double check that one more time. Negative 10/3 times negative 6 is positive 20. Okay, next step here, I'm going to get y by itself, so add 10 to both sides. Okay, now this is in slope-intercept form, but this is not the form that we want to stop at. We want to keep going. We want it in standard. That's the goal of this. So, next step, add 10/3 to both sides. So we have 10/3 x plus y equals 30. Is this in standard form? Not quite, right? We're almost there. The last step they have to do is to get rid of that fraction. A is positive, x and y are on the same side. Multiply everything by positive 3. 3 times 10/3 is going to be 10, so 10x. 3 times y is positive 3y. And then, and then 3 times 30 is positive 90. Make sure when you're distributing, you distribute to every single term in those parentheses. We put that parentheses around the entire thing. But that is it for writing, converting into standard form. Again, you want to start in point slope if they don't already give it to you. And if they do, then great. And then you go to slope intercept and then standard. Those are really the only 3 steps. And just make sure your requirements are fulfilled, right? X and y on the same side, no fractions, no decimals, and A has to be positive. If you have any questions, please feel free to come in and ask.